So you just got a brand new AR-15 and you want to take it for a spin, but then you realize maybe there's a few things you should check before doing so. And that's exactly what this video is. I'm going to give you 4 things that I like to do before shooting a brand new rifle. Now, full disclosure, I am not an armorer or a gunsmith. This is all just from my personal experience as well as from my own research. So please comment below if there's other things that I should have done or if I did anything wrong or left anything out, because I'm just trying to give the best advice I can to those who might not be familiar with the subject, and I'm not an expert, so you helping me out in the comments actually helps me move forward too, so it's much appreciated. Now, I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel, and thanks to them, I can get out on the range and test guns like this one out and go over some of the requirements before actually getting out and shooting it. And I just wanted to share this with everybody because if you're invested in your equipment and you want it to last long term during an emergency situation, these are some of the things you might want to consider before you start beating the crap out of it. So what's the first thing that I do with a brand new rifle before shooting it? All right, one of the first things you want to do with your new rifle before you shoot it is give it a basic inspection. So what do I mean by that? Well, some of this can actually be done at the store before you decide to buy it. So just keep that in mind when you're shopping. But first off, you want to make sure there's nothing obviously wrong with the rifle at first glance. What I mean by that is things like your handguard should be really tight. There shouldn't be any movement. You should not be able to twist this handguard out of alignment with the upper receiver by hand right off the shelf. Another thing you could check regarding that would be the barrel. So your barrel shouldn't have too much movement. It will have a little bit, but it should always return to center. So those are things you can easily check even when you're at the store. You can also double check that things aren't just falling off the lower receiver, like the pistol grip is on nice and tight. It's not wobbly or anything like that. And obviously things like the stock isn't canted and the buffer tube is straight with the lower receiver. So you have all those things you can double check. That gives you just an overall impression that the gun is relatively stable, but you also want to make sure that there's no obvious pitting or gouging in the finish or anything like that too. So first do that inspection and then move on to one that's a little bit more advanced. So what I mean by that is you want to check the fasteners. And on an AR-15 specifically, there's not many fasteners you have to worry about, which means checking them is worth it because it's not going to take you a lot of time to verify that the screws that the gun uses to make sure it doesn't fall apart are actually tightened. So one of the first ones that you're going to want to look at is the castle nut here on the receiver extension. So I'll go ahead and show that to you. Let's see here. So this is your castle nut. Hold on. There we go. And as you can see, I made sure it's very tight against this end plate right here. So you want to make sure that this is tight. And then some of these end plates will actually be staked, which doesn't allow the castle nut to come loose. So yours might not be staked. This one is. But if it's not, you want to make sure this nut is at least very tight. So that's a good thing to check. And then another thing you can check on the lower receiver is actually the pistol grip screw. And so this holds the pistol grip to the lower receiver. And let's see if I can show you that in there. There you go. You can kind of see it down in there. And then it also makes sure that your safety selector actually works properly. So you need that to be nice and tight. Obviously, you can tell by kind of just wiggling it to see if it's on well. But you can also get something like a longer Allen key here and throw that down in there and just verify that it's tight, which this one is. And so you're good to go. So those are the fasteners on the lower receiver. Now let's talk about on the upper receiver, okay? So on the upper, one of the first ones you're gonna wanna check is gonna be the gas key fasteners on your bolt carrier group. So pull that out. And let's see here. Here's your bolt carrier group. And now these are the gas key fasteners. Now these are tight and properly staked, as you can see. They should be both really tight and staked. So just verify that you're seeing this. And when I say staked, I mean these little dimples here in the metal is what holds the screw in once it's at proper torque and won't let it back out. Now a way to test if the screws are actually tight is you can get a torque wrench and set it to 30 inch-pounds. The spec on these should be 35 to 40 inch-pounds. So if you can loosen these screws with a 30 inch-pound torque wrench, then they're not tight enough. Okay, so we'll go ahead and test that out. It's set to 30 pounds. Okay, it breaks at 30 inch-pounds without loosening the screw, which means these are definitely tight. So that's one way you can do it. And of course, if you don't have a torque wrench, you can use an Allen key just to verify they're not loose because they definitely shouldn't move at all. And this is a good thing to check, okay? Now, another thing we can check is going to be the gas block set screws. So some gas blocks are pinned, which means this won't be an issue. But some use set screws, which generally means that a screw goes into a dimple that's in the barrel, and that keeps it from being able to move and keeps it aligned with the gas port. So you can see that set screw in there, right there, and you can verify that by using an Allen key. Now, here's one thing you want to keep in mind. First off, all the torque specs and everything, depending on your rifle, are going to be different individually. It's all going to be different based on the manufacturer, the model, and everything else. So keep that in mind in case you want to make sure things aren't to exact torque spec. But another thing is that I'm just verifying these are tight and not easily able to be loosened. So if I get any movement with just light pressure, either loosening or tightening, that's a red flag for me, and I want to make sure everything's tightened down. Now, this would actually be problematic if it was loose, because I kind of would have to remove this handguard in order to reach the other screw that's on this side of this M-lock section right here. So this would be a pain if I had to tighten it. And honestly, BCM handguards, I have heard at least online, are a little difficult to install. So who knows if that would be a ton of work, but luckily the one screw I can access is very tight. And so if I see gassing issues in the future, I might have to go back and double check that. But in general, if that screw is tight and I don't have gassing issues, we'll probably be fine. Now, the last fastener you want to double check is going to be right here on your handguard. Okay, see if I can get that to focus. There you go. So this is the handguard fastener right here. And obviously, this one is on very tight. And like I said, you can kind of check this by just seeing if your handguard will allow any movement if you go to twist it or anything by hand. But just verify that these are tight, because they often interact with your barrel nut, which is going to make sure your barrel is also tight. And you just want to make sure your handguard is staying aligned with the receiver. So this is a good thing to make sure it's tight, especially with different designs. There are designs that have screws at like the 5, 7, 11, and 1 o'clock positions. And there's other receivers that are set up differently with their lockup method, but this is definitely something you want to verify. So, and of course, I couldn't remember how a clock works in that moment. That's the first basic inspection I would want to do here. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is a function test, and that doesn't mean taking it out and shooting it. It just means putting everything together, racking the bolt carrier group, and making sure that everything works when it comes to the fire control group and all of that. So let's put this back together, verify that, and then we'll just take it from there. All right, now we've got everything back together, and we're going to perform a function test to make sure everything does what it's supposed to. You can do this when you're shopping at a gun store generally with the help of an employee, but if you're at a gun store that has a trigger lock and doesn't let you do any of this, I might second guess buying the rifle, because you want to make sure it's going to work out of the box, and you're missing a lot of information by not being able to perform this function test. So the first thing you want to make sure of is that it's unloaded and safe. And of course, you should have already done that, but now we're going to actually test out the fire control group, which means it's extremely important. So pick up the gun, we're going to rack the charging handle to the rear, which pulls the bolt all the way back, and we're going to let it drop back into battery. So now we are good to go. And of course, there's no magazine in the gun, and we just verified that there's no rounds in the chamber. And we're going to point it in a safe direction. We're going to turn off the safety, and we're going to pull the trigger. Okay, everything at least sounds like it's working properly. So we're going to rack the bolt one more time, and we're going to let go of the trigger in order to kind of see how the reset works. And then we're going to turn back on the safety, okay? And we should be good to go. So I'll show you the controls on the other side now. All right, so we have fire and safe, or semi and safe, according to this particular lower. You also have your bolt catch, which you want to make sure at least works. So what you're going to do for that is pull the bolt carrier group to the rear, press down here on the bolt catch, let your charging handle go, and it should catch the bolt, which it did. So I'll demonstrate that here. You can see now that the bolt is back. Turn it around, and we're going to drop the bolt with the bolt catch. Perfect, all right? Now, another thing we want to test out is the magazine, whether or not it fits well. Okay, so it's in there now, good, no problems at all seating. And then you want to test out your magazine release to verify if that's going to drop the mag out, and it most certainly does. Now, one more thing we're going to test out here is we have a snap cap. So this is not a live round, it's a dummy round. And we're going to load it into the rifle to verify that we can get good extraction as well. So pull back, load that, and now we're going to pull back one more time. And we had good extraction, and the bolt is caught on the magazine, which means it's not going to close. So we have a bolt hold open on empty, which is also a good sign. Drop the magazine out, the bolt remains held open. So this function test seems like it's passed to me. So now that we know all that information and we know that the rifle does what it's supposed to in theory, there's a couple more things we're going to do before we shoot it. Okay, we did our basic inspection, we did our function test, and I did want to mention that you want to make sure these takedown pins work properly, and of course they generally will because the rifle won't go together without them working properly, but you want to make sure that they're retained and that they also have good fitment. Sometimes they can be a little bit tough to get in and out, so you might have to use some pressure or a tool. I've even had to use a mallet in the past to get these out, but over time they generally work themselves out, so I wanted to mention that. So now that we did the first two steps, what's the third one? You need to clean and lubricate the rifle. Now on YouTube, a lot of people will buy a gun in order to review it, and they'll tell you, oh, I haven't even cleaned this, it's right out of the box, I haven't even lubricated it, we're just testing it for reliability and everything else. But that's not what you should be doing. You want to take care of your investment, which is what these firearms are. So before you go out and shoot it, you want to clean out all that factory grease, all that gunk, any burrs and machining dust or anything else that might be in the gun because, you know, it's manufactured in a large facility and stuff just happens. So please clean and lubricate your rifle before you go out and shoot it. All you need really to get started, because this is brand new, we don't have to do anything crazy or do a deep clean, but some CLP of your choice, whatever kind, a nice microfiber cloth, and maybe a bore snake if you want to make sure the barrel is clean as well, which I use bore snakes for this kind of stuff because I'm not too concerned about it. Other people have opinions on that, but for a first cleaning, we're not worried about anything crazy and a ton of carbon buildup or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure everything's properly lubricated, especially when it comes to the bolt carrier group. You want to make sure it's lubricated properly and that everything's clean to a degree so you don't have any of that factory gunk in there still. So please do that. Now, I'm not going to show you how to clean this because there's a lot of other tutorials on YouTube that do a much better job than I would, because I'm not necessarily an expert at cleaning AR-15s, but I have my process which works for me. Obviously, what you develop will probably work for you, but don't just assume you should run these guns dirty because people on the internet say that's what they do. It's still better to take care of your stuff and get it the best possible start it can get, because if there are issues once you move forward, you'll know it's not because the gun wasn't cleaned properly, right? So what's the next thing we want to do before we even shoot this gun? Now, this is something you might want to wait to do until after you test fire the rifle so you're not wasting your time in case you need warranty work or something just goes wrong. But this is something I'm starting to do with the rifles that I'm more invested in, that I plan on keeping and using regularly, and this is to create a maintenance log. So, why is a maintenance log important? Well, because there's parts in this gun that are wear and tear parts or eventually need to be replaced no matter what. So keeping a log as to how much you're using the rifle is important, and especially in the beginning, it gives you a lot of information that you can work with in case there's any troubleshooting that needs to be done. So all I did was just label this booklet with what rifle it's referring to. And then in here, we've got all of the, I guess, details of the particular rifle, so that way I can just reference this quickly, and it shows me things like the model, the cartridge, the barrel, the gas system, muzzle device, type of bolt carrier group, the buffer weight, buffer action spring. And this is one where you can take your buffer or action spring and actually come over here and just measure it before you start shooting. Now, this is one of those things you want to do because it gives you something to gauge off of in case you start to notice you're having gassing issues. And then you can go back and measure your buffer spring or action spring, whatever you want to call it, and see if it's gotten shortened over time. So there are a lot of things that you can actually verify here by marking some of this information down. You can apply that same logic to things regarding these fasteners, right? So here's where I actually put all this information I'm gonna fill out now because we went through and tested it all together. But is the receiver extension castle nut tight? Is it staked? Is a bolt carrier group gas key fasteners tight and staked? Is a gas block set screw tight? All that information will be set right here. That way I know exactly what I started with. Then I also have the expected parts life of this particular rifle when it comes to the amount of rounds fired. So the barrel is expected to last 15 to 20,000 rounds. The bolt should last about 10,000. The action spring should be about 10,000. So that way, if things fall apart up here in this region before this expected life, you know that there might be something else wrong too that you have to investigate. So creating a manual like this is important, at least in my opinion, for being serious about what you're going to be doing with your rifles. And then over here, I've got optics and zeros, and this is just the first optic setup that I'm going to be using on the rifle. And there's space to add more down the road in case I decide to change my mind on anything. But this is just talking about what optic it is, what reticle it has, what zero it's zeroed at, and then of course, what ammunition type I'm using for that zero. So that gives you that information to work with when it comes to making sure you're within range regarding dope or anything else you might be using. And then over here, which we haven't started yet, is going to be the range sessions, round count, and notes. So this would be where I'm going to start logging how many shots fired, maybe like what day, or what part of the year, what month, something as simple as you want to go. And then also giving notes regarding, whether or not there was any malfunctions, there was any issues, or was ammo related problems, or if the rifle itself had any breakages. So this gives me something to reference. And then I can go back here to the front page and verify, what part that was I might need to replace, or what part that life expectancy is at this point, and see if it actually matched up with what it should have had. So that's why a maintenance log is good. It keeps you on schedule. And then also with that round count section, I can go back and start logging cleanings as well. So, every 1,000 rounds, I can say, okay, cleaning done here at this round count, and then move down from there, another cleaning down here. So it's just good to keep this information, and it's something a lot of people probably don't do because it's an additional step and it is a little bit more in depth, and you have to be invested in making sure that these rifles last and do the job that you want them to do. But this is something I'm starting to do, especially with the platforms that I'm more heavily invested in. So this is what I would do before shooting the rifle. And like I said, you could wait on this until after you test fire to make sure everything works right, but then I would just keep a small note, maybe on something like a little write in the rain pad, of how many rounds you fired and everything else that happened on the range that day, so you can then transfer it to your maintenance log once you decide you want to set that up. But these are the things I would do first before even shooting. And a lot of people might not do these steps, and that's understandable. Everyone has their own process, but this is how I am going to do it. So let's go shoot this rifle. All right, so we're back on the range and we're ready to test fire this gun finally, right? So if you don't have iron sights, you're gonna need an optic of some kind. Slap a red dot on there, an LPVO, or even backup iron sights, but make sure you're actually aiming, even if you're just test firing. I've got a 20-round Lancer mag in here, loaded with M193, just to kind of get things going to test this out. And in all honesty, I'm pretty excited because these are the actual first shots out of this rifle. I'm not just saying it for the video. This is literally the first time I've ever shot this rifle. So this optic has already been zeroed on another rifle. I'm hoping it's at least somewhat similar, right? But let's give it a go. Make sure all of our inspections that we did beforehand were actually paid off, and see how this BCM Recce 16 actually handles its first shots through the rifle. I'd say that was a good first 20-round magazine. Lock open on empty. Like I said, not a gunsmith, not an armorer. Make sure you comment below if you have other things you would have added or other things you would check for when it comes to that inspection. I'm really curious, in all honesty. I'm trying my best here to share good information, but I don't have all the experience that some of you have, so it's always beneficial to leave more of that down in the comments. And of course, I'm just one guy, so don't take everything I say as true wisdom. Make sure you check out and research some of your own information as well. But hey, gun had a great first magazine. I'm really excited to get this out on the range and do some more work with it. Anything else you need from me at all, go to magicprepper.com. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.